you join us. We are so pleased to have you join us for our first ever virtual summit. When we began the Africa Alpbach Network, we were motivated by the need to not only strengthen our intellectual and productive energies with European youth, but to do the same amongst ourselves as African youth. Due to the size and complexity of our continent, these opportunities are limited. So while we acknowledge that there are many local and bilateral spaces for engagement, these spaces are often confined to certain regions within the continent, or they have become institutionalized and high level, thereby lacking engagement with everyday youth, such as us in the Africa Alpbach Network. To this end, I believe that we have begun something magnificent here by creating a pan-African, cross-continental and robust network of highly skilled, highly engaged young Africans who are or who will be contributors to the improvement on our continent. And in the spirit of Alpbach, our network will continue to address the most pressing challenges of our time through networking, thought leadership, expert insight, and strategic partnerships. So we're very excited to welcome you because this is one of our very own events where we can showcase exactly who we are as the Africa Alpbach Network. We would like to thank the European Forum Alpbach for supporting our network's establishment. We would also like to thank the IAC Berlin for making this event possible through their support. And we would also like to thank our patrons, board members, and committee leads who have worked hard behind the scenes to also make this possible. These are Dr. Lina Kony-Hofman, Amara Nwangpa, Akosua Pepra, Al Hassan Muniru, Lydia Omuko Jung, Samuel Afadu, Oyindamola Adegboye, and Winnie Kisache. And finally, to every network member who has been part of this journey so far, both on the continent and in the diaspora. Before we kick off with our first plenary for the evening, we have a few pointers about our program for the next 3 evenings. Firstly, please use the chat function to engage with our panelists and our moderators, and feel free to participate in the polls that pop up on your screen. Secondly, activities such as a speed networking session and the breakout sessions will be managed straight from this main Zoom room. So we'll be split into separate rooms from this platform, and therefore there's no need to look for separate links to each session that we have. However, for each evening, there are different links which you should have received via email. And finally, let's have robust but respectful discussions with each other. Thank you so much, and I hope you enjoy our summit. I believe we'll begin with our first plenary. Is our moderator ready?
Present. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Welcome, Ruvimbo. I will hand over to you to introduce yourself and the session. Take it away.
Thank you so much, Thokozani, and welcome to everyone joining us. We'll be hosting this first plenary on the theme, the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, a future outlook on an economically united Africa. My name is Ruvimbo Samanga. I'm a member of the Africa Alpbach Network. I was privileged to receive a scholarship to attend the European Forum Alpbach in the year 2019. And together with our colleagues, we have been working to build the network here in Africa and to develop sustainable discussions and negotiations relating to key development issues, one of which will be this theme, and hopefully you'll be able to join us for the others as well. I am a candidate or a master's candidate in international trade and investment law in Africa. I currently use my trade and investment expertise in the African space industry, which is a very niche industry. And I'm privileged today to host this discussion on what are some of the implications, not only for the youth, but other vulnerable and marginalized communities towards fully making use of the trade agreement. And I'm joined today with a very distinguished panel. Today, I am joined by two panelists, and we'll have one on the way as well. Dr. Ogo will be joining us a little bit later, but she serves as the Regional Coordination Specialist at the United Nations Development Program. We are also joined by Ms. Veronica Masubo, who is a policy economist from the International Growth Center. And finally, we will also have Mr. Appiah Kusi Adomako, who is the West Africa Regional Director at CUTS International. So we're very grateful to have all of you here today. Before I hand over to our lovely panelists for some brief introduction and opening words, I want to give us a little bit of a background on the theme that we'll be discussing today and why it is particularly relevant for us to consider some of these important topics. So, what does an economically united Africa look like? I would want us to consider this question as we go throughout this discussion. But to start off, we all know that there are at least 55 African countries, which means that there are 107 borders around the African continent. This equates to 107 opportunities to boost international and interregional trade. Despite this, Africa accounts for only 2% of global trade, and only 17% of African exports are intracontinental. This is compared with 59% of exports to Asia and 68% in Europe. Regional trade policy is inherently distributional. Therefore, a discussion on how we can improve competitiveness, performance, and industrialization in a way that benefits the poor and vulnerable while stimulating economic activity is necessary. So this discussion will focus on a number of key policy points related to the AfCFTA, as well as how we can use trade as a tool not only for poverty reduction, for growth, but also for sustainable recovery in Africa. I will allocate approximately 10 minutes to our speakers, give or take, to provide a 3-minute introduction about themselves and their work relevant to today's discussion theme. We will then move on to a panel discussion, which will subsist for about 30 minutes, in which we will engage in some important policy points. Finally, we'll move into a brief Q&A. We will allocate about 10 minutes towards Q&A, so I will apportion the questions accordingly amongst our speakers, and then we will move on to our final thoughts. We will have a quick 1-minute lightning round of closing remarks from both the speakers and myself. So without further ado, I will now call upon Ms. Veronica Masubo to please kindly introduce yourself and give us a little bit of background on what you've been working on and how it relates to the subject matter of today. Ms. Veronica, over to you.
Hi, Ruvimbo. Thank you so much for that great introduction and the background, and for bringing me in today in this exciting discussion that we're going to have. My name is Veronica Masubo. I'm a Tanzanian by identification, but I also have lived and worked across different sectors across the world, mainly in the UK at the moment, and also in Asia and Africa. I work as a policy economist at the International Growth Center, which is an NGO, research-based NGO think tank, sometimes we like to call ourselves, sitting under the London School of Economics as well as Oxford University. And what they normally do is they bring in a network of researchers across different universities, mainly the two main ones that I've named, and sort of gather all the evidence that's sort of surrounding different themes, including trade, firms, energy, as well as sort of social protection and other things. And then they try to connect that evidence to clients, which mainly are governments across developing countries. So at the moment, they are based in London as a head office, but they have about 9 to 10 offices across Asia and Africa, including Ghana, Sierra Leone, Uganda, Rwanda, Myanmar, Bangladesh, and Pakistan, for just to name a few. And what they normally do then is in those offices, they have people engaging with policymakers and government workers, particularly like those involved, particularly in high level, and basically trying to get what demand comes from government in these countries. And then we would then come back, sort of formulate policy questions and research questions, and get engaged with our research network, which come from all these universities and different sort of personnel that we have, and come up with sort of policy sound, robust, evidence-based policies that we provide to our clients with the governments. And then what we normally usually do is measure impact by seeing how far this recommendation has gone within government, whether it's been implemented, turned into a policy or a strategy, and so on. So what I do is I work at the hub, at the HQ, and I manage a different relationship between different countries. At the moment, I've been looking after Ethiopia's sort of affairs, as well as Myanmar and Mozambique, but I'm switching over to sort of focusing primarily on trade and firms. So I look after across all different countries, but primarily on those two themes. So of recent, I took the opportunity to sort of take the chance to advertise the sort of work we do around trade and firms and sort of industrialization, and took that on the 20th of November, which is Africa Industrialization Day, which was last year, and basically just sort of discuss the different evidence we have so far relating to what we know about industrialization in Africa. And now that we have the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, as well as COVID-19 being obviously a very big challenge to that. And as of a couple of months, I've just been sort of working around that area of what would the COVID-19 recovery look like in Africa, using this trade tool, as well as sort of looking at sustainable recovery. So we're not going to do what we did before. We're going to look at sort of more longer term sustainable ways of developing as a continent. And then obviously the Continental Free Trade Agreement is a very powerful tool for that. So that's really much of it about me. Aside from IGC, I've worked in different governments in Asia and in Rwanda, as well as Tanzania and Uganda. And I've done a ton of sort of policy related work, as well as sort of other program management sort of experiences as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Masubo. We're so excited to have you, and we look forward to tapping into your vast policy knowledge. Thank you so much. I will hand over to Mr. Appiah Adomako for a brief introduction as well. Mr. Adomako, please, you have the floor.
Let me unmute myself. My name is Appiah Kusi Adomako. I am a Ghanaian based in Accra, and I am the West African Regional Director for CATS International. CATS is a research and policy think tank working in the areas of trade and development, competition and investment regulation, fiscal policies. We do also in the area of consumer protection and consumer education. And we are also policy consultants. And so we consult for most of the multilateral and other international development agencies like the World Bank, ECOWAS Commission, AU, EU, GIZ, World Economic Forum. Now, I have been working, I've spent most of my time working in Europe and North America and also in Africa. And so, but I see myself as an African because most of the work that I do are more geared towards improvement and the betterment of the African economy. Currently in Ghana, we've been doing a lot of work on AfCFTA. 2 years ago, before the start of the trading, we were commissioned by one of the donors in Ghana to do a study titled Assessment of Ghanaian Private Sector Readiness for the AfCFTA Implementation. And when the report of the study came out, it has been very far-reaching to the extent that it's become more like a diagnostic report for us to know what are our weak points that we need to address to allow the country to get the full benefit of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. And as you may know, Ghana is also the host country of the Secretariat. So you cannot become the host country like Brussels, whereby everybody flies into Brussels for meeting at the EU head office, and then at the end of the day, they go back and you don't see Belgium as an economy that is producing more things for export. And so Ghana doesn't want to become the next Brussels in Africa. And I'm sure you've seen how government of Ghana has been working in terms of retooling Ghanaian manufacturing sector to be able to produce and export under the AfCFTA agreement. Now, the organization that I work for, CATS, has three regional offices in Africa: Accra for West Africa, Nairobi for East Africa, and Lusaka for Southern Africa. We also have another center in Geneva, one in Washington, D.C., and we are headquartered in New Delhi, and one office in Hanoi. And when it comes to civil society work in the areas of trade, I think CATS is one of the foremost organizations, and we've been doing a lot of work in this area. I think I'll end it here.
Thank you so much, Mr. Adomako. With that, and on that note, we will quickly go into our panel discussion. I'm very excited to tap into everyone's bespoke knowledge just to bring everyone back up to speed with what we are discussing today. We're looking at the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement, and just a few background facts for those of you who are just joining us now. Africa only comprises about 2% of global trade, and only 17% of African exports are intracontinental. This is compared with 59% in Asia and 68% in Europe. So this shows us that there are a number of trade and non-trade barriers which are holding us back from fully making use of our trade borders within the continent. So this is not only a technical issue, but there is also a political economy associated with trade, as you have heard from the introductions of both of our speakers today. And I would like to put in a personal opinion here and say that I don't believe that trade policy is the sole culprit for trade inequality gains, and that also trade policy may or may not be the magic bullet to alleviate these technical and non-technical barriers. But trade policy is the easiest mechanism to manipulate, and that is the stance that the World Bank and also the AfCFTA Secretariat housed in Ghana is attempting to assure and emphasize the need for complementary policies. That said, and for the benefit of individuals who might not have a background in trade or investment policy, I would like our panelists to begin with a brief discussion on what is the AfCFTA agreement and how exactly is it structured to deliver inclusive growth on the African continent, especially looking at disadvantaged local communities. I will hand over back to Ms. Masubo to start us off on this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. So just to kind of refer to your question, the African Continental Trade Agreement, as it stands, is a tool. And I think there's a couple of stages that we have gone through and we need to go through for it to completely flourish to what we need it to be. So at the moment, I think we're at a stage of having a couple of countries signed and agreed, and we're still waiting for a few to come through. We're getting together an implementation plan, which involves a number of different tools, including digitalization, trade facilitation, and so on. I think we would have to be very careful at how we kind of come to an agreement when it comes to sort of rules of origin, which is basically something that in trade talk, they talk about how we know that the goods that are being traded within the area that we've agreed come from the actual country, because we will find a situation where some countries may have an advantage and get goods cheaper from a different agreement they have outside of Africa, and then they sell it within, and it's so completely, it's not won't work, it won't be efficient at all. So working out the rules of origin issue would be sort of the main thing, and I think they've already sort of been working on that already. And then sort of coming to an agreement where tariffs, at least the rates that we kind of agree on tariffs, or completely reducing tariffs, will be fair across the different members, so as fair as possible. Understand that there'll definitely be an effect of inequality as a result, because we have big players and small players within Africa. And so just understanding where each country's role will play. So if we start on a regional basis and sort of work from that, we can sort of move on and get into a bigger picture and get into continental. So from the west side, from the east side, each member of the sort of continental regional trade blocks should work out what their strategy is in terms of what they want to grow in terms of sectors and what sort of weaknesses they have as well. Work out the rules of origin issue, as well as sort of trade preferences that they have in terms of tariffs, and then figure out what are going to be the losers and the winners in this. I think that's sort of the first thing. And once we get to that, we kind of expand that over into the African Trade Agreement. So I think there's kind of an overexcitement about the fact that we have this huge opportunity with Continental Free Trade Agreement, but I think we're going to have to sort of start small, because we're already kind of working in a world where we are already signing trade agreements with other people, other members, or within ourselves, and we're seeing inequalities. So the trade part should only be seen as a tool. It's not going to help us completely eliminate some of the issues we're finding just because we've signed an agreement paper. So I reckon my advice would be to start small, to look at these sort of different things that are very important to sort of initiate, and then kind of expand from there. And then just to sort of finish up with that, one of the main issues that I find, particularly in Africa, mainly in developing countries, but in Africa, is sort of the size of firms we have. So we have a lot of small firms within Africa who, the reason why we kind of can't compete outside is because we're just too small to compete when we're signing trade agreements outside of Africa with the Europeans and the Americans. And then we also have large firms, but majority of them will either be multinationals or maybe long-term firms that have been there for a while, and we have a very huge gap in the middle. We don't have really firms that are like competitive enough to trade but not big enough to sort of overtake as a monopoly. So we need to sort of work with our governments and private sector to try to figure out how we can first formalize a lot of these firms, because they're mostly informal, and then sort of trying to see how we can get firms to grow. And then once firms can grow, we can sort of push firms to be more trade orientated firms and get people to sort of get jobs. So that's sort of the main thing. We're very much of a continent with gazillions of small firms with a lot of inefficiencies running around within that. So that's another thing I think we need to think about as we go forward.
Thank you so much for your comments. I definitely agree with you. I think that there does need to be a leveling of the playing field. For the benefit of our viewers today, there is a principle known as the MFN principle, that is the most favored nation principle, very important. And the definition would be that members are required to accord the most favorable tariff and regulatory treatment given to the product of any one member at the time of import or export of like products to other members. That is, all members must be treated fairly, regardless of whether they are in a more advantageous position or not. And what I like about the African Continental Free Trade Agreement is that it attempts to make or to level this playing field by recognizing that there are developed and developing countries and varying degrees of development on the African continent. So I think we need to look into what can what can countries contribute to one another in order to level the playing field. So for instance, where one country is not per se able to provide financing or funding, what can they do in terms of capacity building for developing countries? So there needs to be that trade-off. And to be competitive, this agreement needs to provide for give and take between developed and developing countries so that we can share these disparities and we can figure out or lessen the winners and losers gap. And I really do like the point you brought up about the size of the firms. We'll go into that a little bit towards the end of our discussion, but the role of the informal sector and small to medium enterprises is quite important, considering that a large number of the African population is employed in the informal sector or small to medium enterprises. So it'll be interesting to see how we can also consider them in the context of trade. But I will then hand over back to Mr. Adomako to provide us with some few more comments on that first theme. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I don't think I have anything to say, but what I'll try to do is to just add up as what the earlier speaker just said. You know, AfCFTA is unique from any other agreement that African countries have signed on to. We know that before the AfCFTA, we had the regional economic groups. And these groups, whether it's the ECOWAS or COMESA or the EACA or the Central African one, it had its own challenges because even issues of dispute resolutions were not features of the agreement. And one thing that AfCFTA is also novel in the continent is that it is being modeled after the best practices from the EU and other free trade agreement worldwide. And so whenever you become the last person to perform on the stage, at least you have the benefit of the mistake that other nations made. But far from that, we've also seen that AfCFTA is providing opportunities that in the past were not existent in Africa. I mean, under the old regional economic groupings, whenever you move a goods from, let's say, Dakar to Nairobi, you have to pay taxes. And these taxes, the importer is going to pass the taxes onto the consumer. And so the price of the goods will go up. But with AfCFTA, we've seen that 90% of goods will be tax free. And essential to the agreement of the AfCFTA, we've also seen that there are other aspects. The phase 2 of the negotiation is looking at investment policy, competition policy, as well as intellectual property rights. And I think these are very, very essential to ensure that African nations are able to develop. You cannot take away the question of IP right and competition. You know, the European Union, for example, has, every week we hear a decision from the EU competition directorate slapping huge fines on the big techs and sometimes disallowing some mergers and acquisitions. And so with us at the African Continental Free Trade Area, we are also going to have something like competition directorate that will be looking at all these things to ensure that there's a level playing field now that we find ourselves in the common market, and two, bigger players do not abuse their dominance, because if you, and also the issue of the issue of the issue of cartels can also be, contested in the market. So we have opportunity to make Africa work again, and I'm glad that AfCFTA has come at a time that majority of Africans are informed through the social media. In the past, when our fathers were signatories to the regional economic groups, information outlay was very, very bad, but now everybody is aware. Whoever is serious has some modicum of understanding of the AfCFTA, and social media is also driving it further. And so I think Africa has the better opportunity now to be able to integrate and create a better opportunity for the 1.2 billion population. I think I'll end it here.
Thank you so much for that, Mr. Adomako. You raise very important points. When we are dealing with a multilateral trade system, we have to consider that each and every single country will have its own financial systems, trade systems, investment systems at play that we will need to consider. So cross-border taxation, competition law, intellectual property law are all very important considerations. And I think one consideration that is important to have at the back of our minds is also financial payment systems, which have proven a challenge not only on the African continent, I think in general, owing to the diversity of monetary systems around the globe. I'll give the example of Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe is a very difficult nation in which to enact some certain financial transactions owing to, first of all, the multi-currency system. We also have to account for exchange and foreign exchange rates as well. So these are some of the things that policymakers will have to consider is how will we manage these payments across borders? How will we manage exchange rates and the related costs of doing so? So it's great that we are discussing this and sharing information online. We know that the youth are very tech savvy and receive a lot of their information through digital means. So as we're here discussing this and recognizing that of the 1.3 billion population in Africa, the great majority are youth, we also need to consider the context of youth participation in the AfCFTA. So that said, Ms. Masubo, can you kick us off on another trajectory now where we can discuss how young Africans can actively participate in the agreement, especially in relation to employment and entrepreneurial opportunities, and give us a bit of insight on what impact this agreement will possibly have on the future of the youth on the continent. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, so that's actually one of the things that excites me about this agreement. And just to agree to what you just said, is one of the biggest issues we have, particularly for Africa. We have about, I think some countries, the population size of the youth, if I remember correctly, Uganda has something about 60% of their youth are under 20. In some countries like my country, Tanzania, I think it's the same size or less, or a bit more actually. Our biggest problem in Africa right now, particularly with COVID-19 being combined as an impact, is how do we get youth jobs? And as we keep going, more people will enter the employment market, and we just don't have jobs for them. And as obviously we see now that this recession combined and sort of digitalization of work, we're working from home, we need to get youth to do that. So I think one of the most important things about the AfCFTA is that it'll kind of have two effects. It'll have, one would be, it would have to kind of think about increasing skill levels. AfCFTA, as part of one of the policies that come with AfCFTA, is how to increase skill levels for youth, both in terms of digitalization, but it's in terms of just like, what do we need as a continent and what do our youth need for the next generation of economic growth? So I think that's an important part to do. And then the second part is, we would expect as a result of a successful implemented AfCFTA, would be that we are now all integrated and trading with each other, and there's a lot of cross-border works and sort of in and out of sort of trading in general. So youth will be a huge part of all that. So I'm expecting that. So as we're joining up people to sort of, produce things and send it over to this country, we're building infrastructure to try and connect people. Youth will be a big part of that as well. So I think in terms of just sort of providing the policy space and the dialogue on the way forward, there is already a forum actually, and if you're aware of the AfCFTA Youth Forum, where we try to basically participate in a lot of youth discussions and what are the future look like for youth, and what is the demand for skills for youth, as well as what we need to do to make sure that youth are formally integrated in this process. But I think for me, the key things would be make sure that they're integrated in sort of the dialogue of formulating these policies, making sure that skills are part of the discussion, both digital skills as well as practical skills, talking about vocational skills as well as just education in general. And just sort of making sure that we're at the forefront of that, because it's the biggest problem we'll have going forward.
Thank you so much for that. And we are so grateful that you shared a wonderful place of dialogue for all of us. I'll repeat that for people who might not have gotten it. There is the AfCFTA Youth Forum, and that is a wonderful place where you can receive training. I am in staunch agreement that the continuous upskilling and reskilling of the youth is really what will lead to the sustainability of this agreement. So please do kindly take note of that. And hopefully, Ms. Masubo, you'll share more details with us as the time comes, and we will share it with our network. Of course, we would love to be a part. Thank you. And over to you, Mr. Adomako, for your comments as well on the role that youth can play and where you really see youth taking the agreement moving forward.
Okay. I think, unfortunately, during the during the processes leading to the sign up of the agreement, the voices of the youth in Africa were muted. Even civil society voices were also not significant during the process. But at least at the 2019 Heads of State Summit in Niamey, for the first time, the AU and UNECA organized civil society meetings on the sidelines of the AfCFTA, on the sideline of the Heads of State Summit, and I think that was very, very remarkable. And if not for COVID, would have seen it continuing last year and this year. And we've also seen how AU through the ECOSOC is also doing very well in terms of engagement of civil society. But on the question of the youth on AfCFTA, I think the youth has a lot of role to play. And when we come even in our technology hubs in Africa, the tech hubs and the startups, all the startups that are the youth. And you know how technology, the fintech is kind of shifting banking from brick and mortar to what? The virtual. And you come to Accra, you go to Nairobi, you go to Kigali, you go to Johannesburg, go to Cape Town, you go to Cairo, you go to Tunis. You see that the youth are doing very, very well in terms of all these fintech, that even certain things that even Google even lacks. And so the youth has, but until a special program is being instituted to integrate the activities of the youth into the AfCFTA so that we can tap their potential through, a well laid out protocol, we might not be able to get the best out of it. But let me say this thing, for example. You know, when you go to most European universities, they have programs like European studies. So somebody will go and do his or her bachelor's or master's or PhD in European studies. You go to universities in Europe and Africa, universities in Europe and America. People are also studying more about African studies. But when you come back into our own African institutions, we don't see universities running majors and masters and PhDs in African studies or something like AfCFTA that will kind of open people's eye, our youth and the students in our tertiary institution, open their eyes onto the opportunities that comes with the AfCFTA. Our institutions are not doing that much. And people have been saying that our tertiary institutions have failed us. And to some extent, I do agree. They haven't done much as it's expected of them. You go to China, you go to India, you go to Japan, and you go to most countries, everything starts from the tertiary institutions or even the high schools. But you come to Africa, when people enter into institution, whether the high school or the university, students are in a hurry to leave the school because they have made the schooling system very, very unpalatable and unfriendly for them. And until our institutions of tertiary institutions and academia is able to make our universities and high schools more habitable and receptive to ideas of students, I think that we might not be able to get the best out from our young.
Yes, it was answered in That's why I'm the one that actually put it there.
Hello.
I'll just ask
I finished my submission.
Sorry for that interruption, but thank you so much for that submission. And we will quickly move on to the final discussion point for the panel before we go into a brief Q&A. And that is to also discuss the role that this agreement will play in fostering post-COVID recovery, looking especially at the global value chains. We know that COVID-19 has disrupted global value chains as it concerns suppliers, producers, and the question on how resilient African economies are has really been brought to the fore. Especially when we're looking at the manufacture and provision of vaccines, there are various trade and investment related issues to consider. And just as a refresh, what we're discussing today is how the agreement can help us reduce the cost of trade, because again, the discrepancies within the region are quite huge. And if you also factor in the lack of infrastructure, the lack of connectivity even in Africa, we can really see that there's a lot of barriers stopping us from really making use of trade as a tool for economic recovery. So over to Ms. Masubo again. How can we use, or how does the agreement attempt to provide us a safe transition to a post-COVID economy in Africa?
Yeah. So I think from my side, and if I had to think about this, I'm going to be a little bit controversial. I think that we got into a situation in Africa pre-COVID-19 where we became quite comfortable with the sort of systems we built, particularly around sort of trade and value chains and how we got our supplies. As you know, majority of African countries, we are very dependent on imports from China, which obviously that's more of a 10-year change. Previous to that, was dependent on imports from US and Europe. And yeah, it got to a point that all of us can say that there's probably no country in Africa that has a surplus in trade. And we got comfortable with that. We're so used to just sort of, okay, you know what, we can produce that here, but actually it's cheaper just to get it from abroad. And we've also, some of us believe that they're also better quality because it's from abroad. So that got into a point where as soon as COVID hit, a lot of our country politicians realized how bad it was, particularly when things were sort of being cut and value chains were no longer available, and there were goods that were not supplied. That's on a just general sort of essential goods that we required. And then when you look at sort of protective gearing and vaccines as well as sort of this debatable discussion, we also see how we're kind of like the last frontier when it comes to receiving these things. We were just so dependent, and we were the last sort of receiver. Some countries were very innovative to try and think of how they can start creating for themselves. So the likes of Ethiopia, Ghana, Rwanda, they sort of just quickly adapted and sort of maneuvered their manufacturing industries to start looking into how we can sort of supply for themselves. Others had a bit more of a huge negative impact as a result of the fact that they couldn't access some of these goods. But I think controversially, I think this is probably a good time that COVID has made us realize that we were not resilient to shocks, particularly one that is as big as the pandemic. But also we have, the African Free Continental Trade Agreement coming up almost similar at the same time. So we should really look into how we can sort of make this the chance to build our sort of regional value chains as well as the continental value chains. And it will take some time because obviously there was a lot of things we're depending on when it comes to goods. It got to a point where we were only just sort of exporting very, very sort of what you call it, like goods are coming from like primary goods, and then we will expect finished to come back. So to get to a point where we can produce that would take a bit of trial and error over a couple of years, maybe even a decade. But it's all, I think as a continent, at least politically, is what we kind of got to this point where we realized actually this is not a good way to go. And if another type of pandemic would happen again, or anything sort of shock of that nature could happen again, we would actually suffer. So I guess to say that the African Free Continental Agreement has made us realize this, I think a lot of us are pretty much motivated to see what are the bottlenecks that we can try to conquer down to ensure that we start growing our own things. A lot of countries start looking at sort of local content. So even if we can't produce it for ourselves, but we're looking at how we can get FDI firms, foreign direct investment firms, already existing in our countries, in our system.
I believe we've lost Ms. Masubo. I think she will be joining us back shortly, but I am in agreement with everything she has said. The trade system is under a good deal of pressure, and multilateralism has become quite ordinary, to say it quite plainly, and we have taken it for granted as an economic stimulator, but policy requires that we have competition and openness to the rest of the world, and the trading dynamics have unfortunately differed in that regard. And as a result, the poor and the vulnerable, who are not usually able to bear these shocks, are then adversely affected. So, Mr. Adomako, what say you on this point that Ms. Masubo has raised as well?
I think I would say that the pandemic has, I agree with Ms. Masuku. I would say that the pandemic has kind of prepared African countries to ramp up production. Perhaps before the commencement of the trading, if it wasn't the COVID, whereby borders were shut, airports were closed, and you have to make do with everything that you have. I mean, Ghana, almost most of the things that we use in this country are imported from Asia or Europe or North America. But during the peak of the lockdown in March, April, May, June last year, when there was no opportunity for you to import, I mean, PPE, personal protective gears, and other things to fight the COVID from those countries, government of Ghana started, and with the support of the private sector, they were able to put things together, and we saw Ghanaian businesses and firms producing face masks, protective and other protective gear. And even at I think about a year ago, His Excellency the Presidency said that they would like to build additional 100 hospitals, I mean, good municipal hospitals across the country, so that when people are sick, people can get decent treatment. Because around that time, you know, in the past, when politicians and the middle class and the political elites, whenever they are not feeling well, they fly to Geneva, they go to Berlin, they go elsewhere. But when the skies and the planes were grounded, you have to make do with the hospital system that we have kind of neglected over the years. And so the pandemic has made us to believe in ourselves that, look, though we don't find ourselves in the best of the time, but the lessons that we have learned as a people should be able to keep us moving forward. And so now in Ghana, with AfCFTA trading from January 1st this year, we've seen that Ghanaian firms have been very, very aggressive in putting and in producing and exporting to other countries. So I think that the COVID preceding the trading was more of a reality check for most Africans, so that, of course, not all African countries were able to kind of come to the level that top economies like Ghana, South Africa, and I mean Kenya and Morocco were able to take advantage of. There are some least developed countries that are still having to import from other countries. But I know that now that they have seen that other compatriot nations are doing likewise, that alone will also give them the incentives and the motivation for them to work. Also improve upon their ability to produce and export. So I'm in agreement that the COVID has more positive side than negative side for the continent. And even in the past also, if you want to have a meeting, you need to fly people to one city, hotel bills and flight costs and what have you. But we have made all these things possible through people working virtually. And so without the COVID, a lot of meetings and a lot of idea sharing and engagement would not have come. And so I think it has, for me, the benefit outweighs the cost. Of course, for Africa, not for other countries like India, where mortality rate has been so high.
Thank you so much for those comments. Ms. Veronica, welcome back. We were just agreeing and extending on the last point you had made, which is that the COVID-19 pandemic has really given us a reality check, especially to prepare ourselves for a digital economy. We haven't quite touched on trade and services, but working in the service industry as a lawyer, the dramatic shifts that have come about, especially from remote working in the legal profession that's used to being in person and relying on analog systems, is one that definitely needed a lot of attention and has definitely woken up the industry to how important it is to be versatile, especially away from these traditional bureaucratic systems. But with that, I will have to humbly close the panel discussion at this point. It's been quite exciting so far. I really thank you for your insight, and I'm sure that the audience is burning to ask you a few questions. I will tap into a couple in the interests of time, and I ask that we make this a super lightning round so that we can finish in time for the next plenary. But I will start with Ms. Veronica. There's an interesting question here from Gabriel Harris, who is asking if you think that the introduction of one currency in Africa will help boost the free trade among African nations.
I would disagree with you, Gabrielle, just because usually in sort of trade agreements, there are stages before you get to a point where you can introduce one currency. And even with that, the only example that we can give that is the European Union. Even with that, we saw the impact of the economic crisis of 2010 in Europe, and how having one currency actually destabilized a lot of countries, which were, in terms of sort of competitiveness, they were less than some of the higher countries. So for example, the likes of Portugal, the likes of Spain. So I don't think we would be in a fairer system if we introduce one currency. And I don't think it would sort of increase trade, although it would definitely decrease the transaction costs that we go through having to trade across different monetary systems. But in my own sort of summary way, I would say that it's a system we need to sort of look into much further. There are much more higher costs that we're dealing with right now that we need to kind of work on within the continent before we look into sort of monetary policy, monetary costs.
Thank you so much, Ms. Veronica, for that succinct answer. Mr. Adomako, there's a very interesting question here I think you might enjoy. Mr. Chinedu would like to know the role of air mobility and visa requirements in the realization of a unified trade area in Africa. That is, so many African countries still have visa restrictions from other African countries. Is anything being done to address this?
Okay. I think there has been a saying that Rome was not built in a day. And most countries that have visa restrictions or extensive visa requirement for some member countries have been born out from an experience. And it will take time and gradual to allow some of these things to go. And most countries, for example, because we don't have uniformity in level of development. For example, if South Africa were to open their doors visa-free for everybody, and I'm sure within a matter of 2 months, over 5 million or 20 million Africans will troop into that country. And so we need to ensure that we get to the level whereby there are lots of equal opportunities, at least to most of the countries. And that when you do that, there wouldn't be any osmotic pressure whereby people want to move from one country to go there as economic migrant. So that is possibly, but going forward, we also know that the AfCFTA and African Union is also working on the African passport. And most countries have also started this thing by allowing countries, for Ghana, for example, Ghana has a visa on arrival for all African countries, so that you can just get on board any flight coming to Ghana without a visa and at the airport. But even, why do we have to pay visa fee? And I was in Botswana some years ago, and you know, if you are coming from Ghana, you pay visa, and if you are coming visa fee. But if you are coming from America, if you are traveling from US to Botswana, you don't pay visa fee and those kind of things at the airport. And so we have even given preferential treatment for countries that are not Africans than our own. But I think that most of these things will change as we begin to trade among ourselves, and also the threat of security concern. I mean, if you are based in Kenya, and maybe Kenya may have an awful experience from how Al-Shabaab might have kind of attacked them and other things. And so Kenya may want to have a very strong checklist for visa from those coming from, Somalia. And that may be for security purposes. But as time goes on, and we will be able to improve on this.
Thank you so much, Mr. Adomako. I really, as a Zimbabwean, I appreciate the visa on arrival. I know that Zimbabwe is one of the countries that does not actually require a visa to travel to Ghana. I'm not sure what is the underpinnings of that preferential treatment, but it goes a long way in, I think, facilitating openness within regions, and I would hope that more countries would adopt that. I love the use of the metaphor you gave, which is that osmotic process. We know that there are certain economies that most Africans would drift to, whether South Africa and also Rwanda as an up-and-coming economic superpower, and also the East African countries are doing quite well. But we want to steer away from creating, as you said, economic migrants. And I agree that trade liberalization needs to balance competitiveness, performance, and industrialization before we can open up borders, so that we don't overwhelm certain economies. But with that, I really would like to thank our panelists. Thank you so much for your time. I would like to give you 30 seconds each to really summarize your feedback or your takeaways from this session, and leave some parting words, especially for the youth who are tuning into this session, and close off our panel on a bright and hopeful note in the context of this agreement, which is set to change the trajectory of trade on the continent. Ms. Veronica, the floor is yours for the final time.
So summarizing everything, I think that just sort of talking from the last panel discussion we had, this is an opportunity. We should definitely be excited, but again, Rome wasn't built in a day, so we should take it step by step. The most important thing for all of us really is the political will, and that's from our high-end political leaders, presidents, and so on, but also how we as youth take it forward. So get involved in any sort of chance of political participation or any sort of contribution in sort of policy discussion and dialogue when it comes to this, because it really is a game changer for Africa, and I think it came at the right time.
Thank you so much, Ms. Masubo and Mr. Adomako.
I also think that AfCFTA is the way forward, but it will not solve all of our problems. Issues of good governance needs to be also central to ensuring that business can thrive. With that good governance, and when people are fighting and anarchy or disturbances, you will not be able to trade. And so whenever, and for the youth, I've realized that most of the time politicians make use of the youth to start all sort of agitations and violent unrest. And I think that the youth should not allow themselves to be used by politicians to achieve their selfish interests. And of course, as a youth, we must also be concerned about how our country is governed, and we need to be able to speak out. You should be able to speak out objectively and beyond your tribal lines. And so, because once politicians get to know that we vote for them because we are in the same tribal extraction to them, then they don't perform. But if they know that you only vote for them when they make meaningful and sense to you, then they will sit up. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much to our panelists. What I can say as a closing word from both of our speakers today is that the AfCFTA is not the magic bullet. We also need to consider then the role of other social support mechanisms, considering how societies can work to bring about equal opportunities for everyone. Opening up trade at the end of the day is about opening up opportunities, especially to the poor and vulnerable. We need to consider how all of these activities feed into one another and how they impact all people. I will leave it at that, and I will say a hearty thank you to our panelists once again. Thank you for sharing your insight with us as the youth. We are really appreciative of your time, and also that you deem it worthy to include in this dialogue, because we are equal beneficiaries and contributors to future development. So we appreciate this forum with you. And I want to thank as well everyone who has tuned into the panel discussion. We hope you have thoroughly enjoyed it and that you'll continue to give us feedback and questions so that we can keep the discussion going, and hopefully we'll meet in the next summit as well. I will now hand over back to our coordinators, and I hope that you enjoy the next session. Please do stay with us. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much to our first panel and to everyone who asked questions about the Africa Free Trade Agreement. It's clear that this is something that will really either impact our continent for good, or if we don't watch over it and take care of what happens with this agreement, we might find ourselves in a worse position, which we're trying to avoid. I think one of the interesting take-home points is the fact that COVID came and really exposed some of the weaknesses in our economies and exposed a lot of things that maybe we took for granted because we thought we had time to change our economies, to fix our economies, and to get in order. But this is the nature of natural disasters, pandemics, disease. You never know when they're coming, which clearly makes the Africa Free Trade Agreement more important, so we can build resilient economies and ensure that us as the youth, but also those coming after us, we'll have a better future, and we can survive some of the or mitigate the economic effects of pandemics and other issues that we face. So I'm just waiting for some feedback from our media team about our social networking session, which is about to take place, or the live reading. I just want to maybe touch on one other point that someone brought up about visas, and I'm just checking the chat here. So the question was, what do we think about the authorizations of African passports when we move to other countries? I also saw another question about migrating between countries, but I think that was covered in the discussion because as Ruvimbo said, and I think also Mr. Adomako said, there are countries on the continent which tend to attract a lot of fellow Africans because of the economic opportunities there. And hopefully with the standardization of or regular trade, free trade, strengthening economies, you know, there won't always be attraction to certain economies, but we can move around and make sure that people have equal opportunities wherever they are on the continent, which I think is the Pan-African vision that we have in mind. Okay, let me see how far we are. Okay, I believe that now we'll go to the live reading. And I see Patrice, you are going to be giving us the live reading. I see you in the chat. Are you ready for us? Give us a signal. Okay, wonderful. Patrice, you can either share your screen or turn on your screen and you can do the live reading for us. Thank you. Patrice, please unmute yourself if you've already started. I believe you're muted. Thank you.
Okay, I will try to turn on my camera, but if the network is poor, I will be obliged to turn it off. Okay, I will also share my screen so that we can read together. Okay. How to Read About Africa by Nyavanda Wainana. Can you hear me all?
Loud and clear, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Perfect, thank you. Always use the words Africa or darkness or safari in your title. Subtitle may include the words Zanzibar, Maasai, Zulu, Zambezi, Congo, Nile, big, sky, shadow, drum, sun, or bygone. Also useful words such as guerrillas, timeless, primordial, and tribal. Note that people means Africans who are not Black, while the people means Black Africans. Never have a picture of well-adjusted African on the cover of your book or in it, unless the Africans has won the Nobel Prize. In AK-47, predominant ribs, naked breasts, use this if you must include an African. Make sure you get one in Maasai or Zulu or Dogon dress. In your text, treat Africa as if it were one country. It is hot and dusty with rolling grasslands and huge herds of animals and tell. Thin people who are starving. Or it is hot and steamy with very short people who eat primates. Don't get bogged down with precise descriptions. Africa is big, 54 countries, 9 million people who are too busy starving and dying and wearing and emigrating to read your book. The continent is full of desert, jungles, highlands, savannas, and many other things, but your reader doesn't care about all that. So keep your description romantic and evocative and unparticular. Make sure you show how Africans have music and rhythm deep in their souls and eat things no other human eats. Do not mention rice and beef and wheat. Monkey brains is an African's cuisine of choice, along with goats, snake, worms, and grubs, and all manner of game meat. Make sure you show that you are able to eat such foods without fishing, and describe how you learn to enjoy it because you care. Taboo subject, ordinary domestic scenes, love between Africans unless a death is involved, references to African writers and intellectuals, mention of school-going children who have not suffering from yaws and Ebola fever or female genital mutilation. Throughout the book, adopt a sort of voice in conspiracy with the reader, and a sad, I expect so much tone. Establish early in your liberalism is impeccable, and mention near the beginning how much you love Africa, how much you fell in love with the place and can't live without her. Africa is the only continent you can love. Take advantage of this. You are a man, thrust yourself into her warm virgin forests. If you are a woman, treat Africa as a man who wears a brush jacket and disappear off into the sunset. Africa is to be pitied, worshipped, or dominated. Whichever angle you take, be sure to leave the strong impression that without your intervention or your important book, Africa is doomed. Your African characters may include naked warriors, loyal servants, diviners, and seers, ancient wise men living in hermetic splendor, or corrupt politicians, inept polygamous travel guides, and prostitutes you have slept with. The loyal servant always behaves like a 7-year-old and needs a firm hand. He's scared of snakes, good with children, and always involving you in his complex domestic dramas. The ancient wise man always comes from a noble tribe, not the money-grubbing tribes like Kikuyu, the Igbo, or the Shona. He has rimmed eyes and is close to the earth. The modern Africa is a fat man who steals and works in the visa office, refusing to give work permits to qualified Westerns who really cares about Africa. He's an enemy of development, always using his government job to make it difficult for pragmatic and good-hearted experts to set up NGOs or legal conservation areas. Or he's an Oxford-educated intellectual turned serial killing politician in a Savila Row suite. He's a cannibal who likes crystal champagne, and his mother is a rich witch doctor who really runs the country. Among your characters, you must always include the starving African who wanders the refugee camp nearly naked and waits to be benevolence of the West. Her children have flies in their ears lids and pots bellies, and her breasts are flat and empty. She must look utterly helpless. She can have no past, no history. Such diversions ruins the dramatic moments. Mourns are good. She must never say anything about herself in the dialogue except to speak about her unspeakable suffering. Also, be sure to include a warm and motherly woman who has a rolling laugh and who is concerned for your well-being. Just call her Mama. Her children are delicate. These characters should buzz around your main hero, making him look good. Your hero can teach them, bath them, feed them. He carries lots of babies and he has seen death. Your hero is you, if reported. or a beautiful, tragic international celebrity aristocrat who now cares for animals in fiction. Bad Western characters may include children, Tory cabinet ministers, Afrikaners, employees of the World Bank. When talking about exploitation by foreigners, mention the Chinese and Indian traders. Blame the West of Africa's situation, but do not be too specific. Broad brush strokes throughout are good. Avoid having the African characters laugh, or struggle to educate their kids, or just make do in mundane circumstances. Have them illuminate something about Europe and America in Africa. African characters should be colorful, exotic, larger than life, but empty inside, with no dialogues, no conflict or resolution in their stories. No death occurred to confuse the cause. Describe in detail naked breasts, young, old, conservative, recently raped, big, small, or mutilated genitals, or enhanced genitals, or any kind of genitals, and dead bodies, or better, naked dead bodies, and especially rotting naked dead bodies. Remember, any work you submit in which people look 50 and miserable will be referred to as the real Africa. And you want that on your dust jacket. Do not feel crazy about this. You are trying to help them to get AIDS from the West. The biggest taboo in writing about Africa is to describe and show dead or suffering white people. Animals, on the other hand, must be treated as well-rounded, complex characters. They speak or grunt while tossing their manes proudly and have names, ambitions, and desire. They also have family values. See how lions teach their children. Elephants are caring and are good feminists or dignified patriarchs. So are gorillas. Never, ever say anything negative about elephants or a gorilla. Elephants may attack people's property, destroy their crops, and even kill them. Always take the side of the elephant. Big cats have public school accents. Hyena are fair game and have vaguely Middle Eastern accents. Any short African who live in the jungle or desert may be portrayed with good humor, unless they are in conflict with an elephant or a chimpanzee or a gorilla, in which case they are pure evil. After celebrity activists and aid workers, conservationists are Africa's most important people. Do not offend them. You need them to invite you to their 30,000 acre game ranch or conservation area. And this is the only way you will get to interview the celebrity activist. Often a book cover with heroic looking conservationists on neat works magic for sale. Anybody white, tanned or wearing khaki who once had a pet antelope or a farm in a conservationist, one who is preserving Africa's rich heritage. When interviewing him or her, do not ask how much funding they have. Do not ask how much money they make of their game. Never ask how much they pay their employees. Readers will be put off if you don't mention the light in Africa. And sunsets, the African sunset is the must. It is always big and red. There is always a big sky. Wide empty space and game are critical. Africa is the land of wide empty spaces. When writing about the plight of flora and fauna, make sure you mention that Africa is overpopulated. When your main character is a desert or jungle living with indigenous people, anybody short, it is okay to mention that Africa has been severely depopulated with AIDS and war. Use caps. You will also need a nightclub called Tropicana, where mercenaries, evil nouveau riche Africans, and prostitutes and guerrillas and expats hang out. Always end your book with Nelson Mandela saying something about rainbows and renaissances because you care. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrice, for that reading, which reminds us about how people probably still see the continent. I liked the name of the nightclub. What was it? Tropicana. And writing about the sunset and everything in between. Let's see if we have any comments in the chat about the reading. Has anyone read this piece before? Binyavanga Wainana did pass away, I think 2 or 3 years ago, but I think this was one of his most prolific essays. And I've read one of his books. One day I'll write about this place. Thank you so much. Patrice, when you were reading that, what was going through your mind?
It was, I really like this piece, and I also read it in 2019 when I was in Austria, and it was so amazing how it touched me, and I've never forgotten it. So it's, you are like, wow, this is true. This is what I've always seen in newspapers, documents, internet, everywhere, and it's just killed the surprise now. We know that that is what they learn and how they know, things they know about Africa. And it's up to us to change that narrative. We need to write it, we need to write now our own Africa in our ways.
This is true. And I think this was something that we also looked at AfCFTA 2019. When we had seminar week, especially the seminars on Africa, you know, the danger of a single narrative of our continent. It still surprises me that in what century are we in? 21st? That we still struggle with some of these perceptions, but as you say, some of the work unfortunately has to be done by us in terms of disproving these narratives. So let me just check where we are with our networking. Sam, maybe if you can just give me a signal to let me know whether we can move into our social networking for the evening, and then we will meet back here tomorrow. Let me just wait for a signal from Sam. Okay, all right, perfect. So now we will go into the social networking part of our summit, which will end this evening's program. So what's going to happen is we will be split into breakout rooms where we will do speed or social networking. So we will talk to each other for a few minutes. What we'll do is ask that we introduce ourselves. So our name, our country, maybe our country of birth, if we're in the diaspora or somewhere outside the continent. also what we are doing, whether we're studying, we're working, any opportunities that we know of that we can introduce each other to. And if you're part of the Africa Alpbach network, please say something about the network, how you joined, when you joined, which year you're an alumni from, and then we'll get to know each other in that way. I'll just remind you that this will be the last activity for today. We'll meet back here tomorrow at 5 p.m. GMT, which I believe is 7 p.m. in most of Southern Africa. And I think that is 8 in East Africa. If you can let me know your region and what time 7 GMT is by posting in the chat so we all show up on time. With that being said, thank you for joining us this evening. Before we go into the breakout rooms. We hope you enjoyed the plenary. Thank you very much to our moderator for the first plenary, Ruvimbo Samanga. We really enjoyed that. And we thank our panelists for taking part as well. Okay, so let's just wait to join the breakout rooms and we'll go ahead with our social networking.
I was alone in my room, so I had to come back.
Money's running out, jobs cannot be found, and our dollar increases every day. People losing hope, where we're heading no one knows, but we're certain something's gotta change. But that $1 million idea in your mind may be just what we need to survive. So it's not too late to dream. It's not too late to believe. Times may be hard, but faith is the key. It's not too late to dream. Go on and spread your wings. God made his investment into your destiny. So it's not too late to dream. Oh, years are racing by. When you were younger, you had time. Not to mention, you got a family now to feed. Bills are piling up. You've suffered long enough. Now they're saying you got a terminal disease. But that $1 million idea in your mind may be the motivation you need to stay alive. So it's not too late to dream. It's not too late to believe. Times may be hard, but faith is the key. So it's not too late to dream. Go on and spread your wings. God made his investment into your destiny. So it's not too late to dream. So start the blueprint to your invention. For I see a winner in you. You can go back to school, be an entrepreneur. For there is greatness in you. It's not too late to dream. It's not too late to believe. Times may be hard, but faith is the key. Faith is the key. It's not too late to dream. Spread your wings. God made his investment
Hello, Abba. You're the only one with your microphone unmuted.
I barely heard anyone speaking.
Did everyone here manage to attend the speed networking session? You can just give me a hands up or mention in the chat. Okay, so I think we'll come back to the plenary and then we'll close for the evening.
Jerusalema ikayalami noloze uhambe nami zungangishilana Jerusalema ikayalami noloze uhambe nami zungangishilana dawo yami ayikholana buso wami awukholana ilondoloze zuhambe nami dawo yami ayikholana buso wami awukholana ilondoloze
Right. Thank you everyone for joining us for the first evening of our virtual summit. We'll meet back here tomorrow at 5 p.m. GMT, which I think is 7 in SADC and 8 in East Africa. Can anyone give me a shout and tell me what time that'll be in the West and in the North? That'll be helpful for those of us who always convert to the wrong time. Anyone? Let me know. What time will that be in the North and the West tomorrow? If you know, you can pop it into the chat. Okay, 6 p.m. West African time. Okay, perfect. So 5 GMT, 6 p.m. West Africa time, 8 p.m. yes in Moscow, which, so yeah, in the diaspora. Thank you, good news. 9 p.m. in Sweden. Thank you, Flavia. 7 p.m. Southern Africa, SADC, if I'm not wrong. And we will be having a plenary on, 8 p.m. East Africa time. Thank you, guys. No, 7 p.m. in Sweden. Okay, Thank you, Elizabeth. We'll be having a plenary discussing whether or not democracy is in decline. As we all know, the politics always gets spicy and interesting. So please join us and join us on time tomorrow. And thank you so much for attending this evening. Have a good night. Bye-bye.
Jerusalem, Ikayalami, Ilondoloze.